Today we're going to play the graphs of sine and cosine game, but in the other direction that we've played it before. I'm going to fill in some information on this graph, and we're going to use that information to find other points on the graph, other information from the graph, and then write an equation that will give us this graph. So I just need to make sure that I give you some points where you can determine the amplitude and the period, the horizontal shift, and the vertical shift. So let's suppose that this point up here at C is at -1, 7. And let's see, the point E will be at 3, -3. All right. So we want to determine the four things. We want to determine the middle, the amplitude, the period, and any horizontal shift. And also the start, like what of the four starting points. So are we going to write the graph starting at the bottom, like at point A or point E? Are we going to write the graph starting at the top, like at point G or point C? Are we going to think of the graph starting at the middle going up, like at point B or point F? Or are we going to think of the graph starting at the middle going down, like at point D or point H? There are four things that we need to identify. We need to identify the middle, the amplitude, the period, and any horizontal shift. That last one, sometimes we refer to as the start, but we have lots of choices. There are 8 reasonable choices of start on the graph that I've drawn here. And I could go out to 9. 8's lucky, so I'm going to stop at 8 and pretend that this bottom isn't there. So we need to identify 4 things. We need to identify the amplitude. We need to identify the middle. We need to identify the period. And we need to identify a start. And we'll put the start in quotes because we have lots of choices of where we consider the graph starting. All right. Let's identify each of the things. We have enough information. I've got a value, I've got a point at the top. I don't know what's going on at the middle going down in between the top and the bottom, but I know what's going on at the top and I know what's going on at the bottom. From this, we can figure out the 4 pieces of information that we need. Remember that the amplitude is the distance from the middle to the top. The amplitude will be the distance from the middle to the top. And this is distance in y. Oh, also, or from middle to the bottom. And the amplitude is the vertical distance from the middle to the top or from the middle to the bottom. Notice that the top has a y value of 7 and the bottom has a y value of -3. When we're looking for the amplitude, we're looking for distances vertical. So we're looking for vertical distances. So wherever we have at the middle, the amplitude is the distance from the middle to the top, or from the middle to the bottom, they're the same. I don't know where the y coordinates of the middle are, but I know at the top we're at 7, at the bottom we're at -3. So how far is it from 7 all the way down to -3? So if we go from 7 to all the way down to -3, that's a distance of 10. It's 10 units to go from 7 to -3. And so the amplitude will be half of that. So the amplitude is 5. So from the top to the bottom, if I look at the difference of the top and the bottom, ten is the distance from the top to the bottom. So half the distance will be 5. So the amplitude is equal to 5. Once we have the amplitude, we can go after the middle since we didn't know what it was before. So the middle, we know the distance from the middle to the top is 5. The amplitude is 5, and the top is at 7. So if I just subtract 5 from the top, that'll tell us where the middle is. So the top is at 7. So to find the middle, the top is at 7, and the amplitude is 5. So the middle will be at 7 minus 5. So the middle is going to be at 2. The middle will be the y coordinate of all the points on the middle line. The y's are all 2 on that midline. So now I can start filling in some of these other values, at least the y values of the points B, D, F, and H. And I should have made my graph shorter because I can't fit all kinds of stuff on. But if the top is at 7 and the bottom is at -3, then halfway between, the y coordinate of the point at the middle should be a 2. Also, this point F, I don't know what the x coordinate is yet, but the y coordinate should be at 2. For this point H, I don't know what the x is yet, but I know the y coordinate should be 2. Forgot one. Back here at B, I don't know what the x is yet, but the y coordinate will be at 2. I also know that the other bottom point A, I don't know what the x coordinate is, but the y coordinate should be the same as point E, also at -3. Similarly, up here at the top, I don't know what the x coordinate is yet, but I know the y coordinate should be 7 because everything along the top of this graph is at 7. Top's at 7, the bottom's at -3. If we just average those two, that'll tell us what the middle is. So we can also just find the average of the top and the bottom. Seven plus -3 over 2 is equal to 5. And that will tell us the amplitude. The middle is a fixed y value. The amplitude is a change in y values. The amplitude in the middle are vertical things. Any questions?
Should that be 7 minus a negative 3 over 2? So that
No, that's the difference. Here I'm finding the average of the top and the bottom.
the average, well, 7 plus negative 3 is 4 over 2 is 2. So the math doesn't seem to work there to me.
Oh, I put this over, I was thinking of amplitude. You are correct. I put this over in the amplitude column and I wanted to find the middle. I was supposed to be speaking about the middle. It's the middle that's the average. The middle is also the average of the top and the bottom. So the middle will be the average of the top and the bottom. So if the top is at 7 and the bottom is at negative 3, 7 minus 3 is 4 divided by 2 is 2. I was going for the middle and not the amplitude. Thank you. So the middle will just be the average of the top and the bottom. So if the top's at 7 and the bottom's at negative 3, the middle will be at 2. We could also use this to find the amplitude. So we can either find the amplitude first, use that to find the middle, or find the middle first, and then use that to find the amplitude when you have the top and the bottom as your known points. Any other questions? Any other mistakes that I've made? Because they will be common. Next up, we want to find the period. The period is the change in x for the length of one cycle. So from the bottom to the bottom, from the top to the top, from the middle going up to the middle going up, or from the middle going down to the middle going down. So the period is the length of one cycle. So that's the top to the top, bottom to bottom, and so on. What we have is the length, the change in x from the top to the bottom. And that's only half of a cycle. So right now we have half of the cycle because we have a top and the bottom. So I know what's going on at the top at that point C, and the bottom E. So the difference in the x's, I really made this graph way too big. The difference in the x's, so from -1 to 3, that's going to be half of a cycle. That's going to be half of a period. So half of a period is going to be 3 minus a -1. That's the difference between the x's at the top and the bottom. So a half of a period is 3 plus 1 or 4. So the period is equal to 8. Now that we know what the period is, we can also figure out what a quarter of the period is. Eight divided by 4 is 2. So between any two of our significant points, it's going to be 2. So from the bottom to the middle going up, that'll be a difference of 2. From the top, middle going up to the top, that'll be a difference of 2, and so on. We can use this to figure out the x coordinates of all the points that we're interested in. Each quarter period is going to be is going to be 2 units apart horizontally. So if I start out here at -1, when x is -1, from the top to the middle going down, that'll be a difference of 2 in the horizontally. So -1 plus 2 will put us at 1. 1 plus 2 will put us at 3. So it's good that that matched up. 3 plus 2 will put us at 5, and then 7, and then 9. Now, if we go backwards, if we add 2 going from left to right, we'll subtract 2 going from right to left. So 9, 7, 5, 3, 1, -1, -3, and then -5. So now we filled out more information based on what we know about how graphs of sine and cosine work. We need to look at we need to have some way to figure out the distance from the amplitude and the vertical shift. We need some information to figure out what the period is. And then we can choose any one of these 8 points to be a start, and that'll determine what our horizontal shift is. Any questions? All right. Next thing we want to do is take this information and write an equation. So once again, let's remind ourselves that there are many to choose from. So we've got 8 to choose from. All right. Now let's use this information to write an equation. We've got an amplitude of 5. We've got an amplitude of 5. We've got a middle of 2. We've got a period of 8. And then we'll just have to pick a start. Now I need to drop these numbers into an equation. The period is 8, but 8 is not the number that goes into the period. Remember that the period is 2 pi over the number that goes into the equation. So the period is 2 pi divided by b. So instead of taking, so to figure out b, we'll plug in the period and solve for b. So 8 is equal to 2 pi divided by b. So b is 2 pi divided by 8, which we can simplify to pi over 4. Just going to exploit multiplication and division in the relationship. You could multiply by b and divide by 8, or we could just know what we know about multiplication and division. If 3 is 6 divided by 2, then 2 is 6 divided by 3. So b, the number that goes into the equation, is pi over 4. Now we've got 8 starts to choose from. So I got to pick just any one of those points, A through H. I'm going to say that's where I'm going to consider the start. That will determine the horizontal shift and whether we're using plus or minus, sine or cosine. So the start determines 2 things for us: the horizontal shift and also plus or minus sine or plus or minus cosine. So now we have to make a choice. The amplitude in the middle, those are just fixed. They're just going to be coefficients and coefficient of the trig function and the constant term. Let's start with the first point that we know. Let's start at the point C, which is -1, 7, and it is at the top. So we're starting at -1, 7. This is going to tell us 2 things. First of all, C is at the top of the graph. So that means we're going to use a positive cosine. So first we see that first, follow the order here. The horizontal shift is -1. C is at the top. So that we're going to use positive cosine. So that's based on saying I'm going to start this graph at C. Now we can write our equation. We start with a fixed value. So let's start at the mid. The mid is 2. The amplitude is 5. That's going to be the coefficient of the trig function. The trig function that we're going to use is cosine because we're starting at the top. And it's a positive cosine. In parentheses, we'll have a coefficient of theta that we get from the period. So the coefficient of theta is going to be pi divided by 4. Then in parentheses, we put theta minus the horizontal shift. In this case, the horizontal shift is -1, so it's going to look like theta plus 1. Now all we have to do is take this over to Desmos and see if it has all those points that we expected. So let's jump over to Desmos, our favorite graphing calculator. And put in y equals 2 plus 5 times the cosine of, my coefficient of theta is going to be pi over 4. You just type pi and then divided by 4 If you keep typing here, it's going to keep putting things in the denominator under the pi. So I need to go push the right arrow and put theta plus 1. Close the parentheses inside, close the cosine, and we have the graph that we expected. Here's the top at -1, 7. Here's the bottom at -3, 3, 7, 7, 11, -3, which we didn't get. There, -5, -3. Now, we don't see the middle. The middle is supposed to be here at 2, but Desmos doesn't have anything to lock onto. So I'm going to put an extra line, y equals 2, because that's where the middle is supposed to be. And then I'll make that orange. I'll also put this in black. So here's our top. These are the 2 points we were given, -1, 7 and 3, -3. From there, we were able to figure out all these middle points were at 2. All the top points were at 7, and the bottom points were at -3. We were also able to calculate the period, since from -1 to 3, that's the top to the bottom horizontally, that's a difference of 4. So if half the period is 4, then the whole period is 8, and a quarter period is 2. So that's why all the x coordinates are 2 units apart. Any questions? Earlier, I mentioned that we have lots of points to choose from. Let's suppose that instead of starting at -1, 7, we said, I don't want to use cosine. I would rather use a sine graph. So I'm going to take as my starting point this point 1, 2. So let's start at D, 1, 2. This will tell us that a horizontal shift is going to be 1. And since we're at the middle going down, it's going to be a negative sign. So let's write a different equation where we think of D as the starting point. So now our horizontal shift will be at 1. And since we're at the middle going down, we'll use negative sine. Sine because middle, negative because it's at the middle going down. Let's write an equation. Our fixed value, our constant is 2, because that's where the middle is. The coefficient of the trig function is going to be 5, because that's the amplitude. The trig function that we're using is sine, because we're starting at the middle. And since it's the middle going down, it will be a negative sign. The coefficient of theta is still pi over 4. Theta is still theta. And inside the parentheses with theta is theta minus the horizontal shift. And in this case, the horizontal shift is 1. So I write theta minus 1. Let's take this equation over to Desmos to make sure it gives us the same graph. So let's turn off our original, start a new one, and type in y equals 2 minus 5 times the sine of pi over 4. Get out the fraction. And then x, or theta, minus 1. Close the x minus 1, close the sine. And we can see we are getting the same set of points that we had before. just as we had foreseen. Oh, that one, we didn't have that one. Turn the black graph back on. We don't see it because they're the same. They're the same picture. Any questions? So the decision of which to use between sine or cosine depends on what we're considering to be the start. Whatever point we're going to get for a horizontal shift, that'll tell us whether you use a positive or negative, sine or cosine. If we start at the top, if we take this top to be the start, then we're going to use a positive cosine. We're going to write it in the form of positive cosine. If we take as a starting point the bottom, then we're going to be choosing negative cosine. If we start off at the middle going up, middle is going to be a sine. Going up is positive. If we start at the middle going down like we just did, middle is sine, down is negative. So this would be a negative sign like we just used. This means we're not writing the equation for this function. We're writing an equation for this function because we have lots to choose from. If, for example, we started at point E, that'd be the next logical one to go start at. E is at 3, -3. So our horizontal shift is going to be 3. This point is at the bottom of the graph. So we're going to use a negative cosine. Everything else is the same. The middle is our constants. Our amplitude is the coefficient of the trig function. Since we're starting off at the bottom, or considering this, the start to be the bottom, we're using negative cosine. The period is still 8, so the b is still pi over 4. And our horizontal shift for this one is 3. So I just drop that in there. Then, of course, we're going to want to know that this is going to be give us the correct function. So if we jump over to our graph, turn these two off and start a new one, y equals 2 minus 5 times the cosine of still pi over 4 times x minus 3. And we get this graph, and we can see that the bottom, middle going up, top, middle going down, bottom are all the same points. We didn't use that one. So there are 3 equations that will give us the same graph. By adjusting where we consider the start to be, that adjusts what trig function we use, sine or cosine, the sign that we attach to the amplitude, positive or negative, and the horizontal shift. So there are lots of equations that we can use to describe this function. There's actually an infinite number of equations that we can use to describe this function. At least it's a countable infinity, so you don't get to complain about that too much. There are four that I would say make the most sense to use. The most reasonable ones are going to be the ones closest to the vertical axis. So that top, that bottom, this middle. Oh, I can't decide. So these are the 4 points that are closest. Oh, maybe this one. Nope, that's further away. Those are the 4 points that are closest to the vertical axis. So those kind of make the most sense of all the choices. It would be really weird to start at the top up here with a horizontal shift of 7 when you have a periodic function with a horizontal shift of -1 and a period of 8. It would be really weird to start off at 7. People might get suspicious if you do that. But even if we start at 7, the middle is still 2. If I start off at the top, I'm using a +5, a positive cosine. My period is still pi 8, so I still have to have a coefficient of pi/4, but then I will type x minus 7, and I get the same graph. So like I said, you have I didn't share screen before I did that. You know, if you had a professional teacher, things like that wouldn't happen, but y'all are stuck with me, so. I don't know. Any questions? So here's how we're going to play the game. I'm going to post a graph, and then you're going to write that. You're going to type in an equation for that graph. Any questions? Then once you post, you can see, once you post your answer, you'll be able to see what everybody else posted to see if you have different ones. There's no extra credit for having a really different one. If everybody posts the same one with the same start, that's totally okay. But you should recognize that there's multiple ones that you can use. And in later iterations of this problem, I'm going to say write 2 equations for the graph to get you practice moving around the horizontal shift and choosing positive or negative, sine or cosine. Any questions? Comments? Defaults?
Where will we find those? Are they going to be under assignments, or are they going to be under something else?
They're going to be set up as discussions. So we're going to have to learn how to type type equations into our text box. So that's the other purpose of this exercise. So they'll be in discussions, but they'll also be in assignments, and they'll also show up in modules. In the module for chapter 4, one of your assignments is going to be, it'll say graded discussion, and then you click on the link in the graded discussion, and it'll take you to the discussion where you type your answer. You'll see the graph and then type your answer. Any questions? How's everybody? This is the end of week 6 for us of 17 weeks. So I don't know if that's encouraging or discouraging. This is the end of week 6. So what we really want to make sure that we have is you're going to practice on this graphing business, writing equations, looking at a graph. But then also make sure you go back and review all of the other stuff that we've done. Solving right triangles, know your values of quadrant angles, 30, 45, and 60 going all the way around. Know those in degrees and radians, and be able to know your radians, the degree equivalent of radian angles. It only seems like it's a lot to remember because it's a lot to remember. And you have to remember all of it all the time in perfect detail. Maybe it is a lot. All right, so yes, the discussion will be a graded discussion, so it'll show up in the assignments. It'll show up in the assignments, it'll show up in the discussions, and if I remember, it'll show up in the module as well. Any questions? Comments? Snide remarks? I can give you a preview of what the... Here we go. So if you click on that picture, it'll show you, you can see the graph that I'm giving you. And it's similar to the problem that we did today. I gave you a top point and a bottom point, and you can find the equation using those two. Other iterations of this problem, I'll give you, say, the bottom point and a middle point. And you just got to figure out the pieces from there. Any questions?
Is it going to be based on correction or like?
You'll still have multiple chances to do the problem. So this one I'm gonna have to grade by hand. So since I'm doing it as a discussion, so I go into the discussion, I look at your answer. If you get 0 points, then you just have to post another answer.
Okay, thanks.
All right, that's gonna do it for today. That's gonna do it for this week. I will see y'all on Tuesday, and thanks for playing.